They called the widow the last choice, then the richest cowboy in Red Willow crossed the room toward her. The harvest social had been loud a moment before. Fiddles scraped out a lively tune. Boots struck the schoolhouse floor. Someone laughed near the cider table. Abigail Mercer sat beside the last empty chair along the wall, her hands folded neatly over her dark blue dress, while three younger women waited for partners beneath the glow of oil lamps. She had baked 6 of the pies cooling by the window and 2 trays of biscuits for the supper table. Nobody mentioned that. They noticed other things first. That she was 34. That she had been widowed 4 years. That she owned a small bakery instead of a ranch. And, most of all, that Abigail was larger than the women Red Willow liked to call graceful. Helen Crowley stood a few feet away with her daughter Rose, watching the unmarried men choose dance partners. Rose was pretty, polished, and dressed in cream-colored silk that probably cost more than Abigail made in a month. Helen leaned close to her daughter, but not close enough. "Don't worry, Rose. Mrs. Mercer will still be here after everyone else has been chosen." A man beside them chuckled. Helen smiled into her cider. "She always is." Abigail heard every word. Her fingers tightened once. Then relaxed. She did not look at Helen. Did not leave. Did not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing the insult land. A little girl hurried past, dropped a lace handkerchief, and kept running. Abigail bent, picked it up, and called softly, "Miss Clara." The child returned, took it, and smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Mercer." Abigail smiled back. "Keep hold of it this time." Then the front door opened. Caleb Whitmore stepped inside, carrying his hat in one hand. Conversation shifted almost at once. Caleb owned more cattle than some men in Red Willow had seen in their lives. His ranch stretched for miles beyond the North Ridge, and every unmarried daughter with an ambitious mother seemed to know exactly how many head he ran. Rose straightened. Helen touched her elbow. Caleb greeted 2 ranchers near the door, then stopped. He had heard the last few words. His eyes moved toward Helen. Then Rose. Then Abigail. Abigail noticed him looking and turned away. She knew that look. Curiosity first. Pity second. People had been giving her both since Daniel died. The fiddler started another tune. Men stepped forward. Chairs emptied. Abigail remained where she was. Then Caleb began walking. Past Rose. Past the mayor's niece. Past 2 women who smiled before he even reached them. The room slowly quieted. Abigail glanced behind herself, certain someone else must be standing there. Nobody was. Caleb stopped directly in front of her. He did not look around to see who was watching. He did not smile at the room. He looked only at Abigail. "Mrs. Mercer." She lifted her eyes. "Mr. Whitmore." Caleb offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" For one long second, Abigail stared at his open palm. She could feel the entire schoolhouse waiting. A joke, perhaps. A dare. Or the most expensive form of pity Red Willow had ever offered her. She almost refused. Then she noticed Caleb's face. No amusement. No embarrassment. No charity. Just patience. Abigail placed her hand in his and stood. Somewhere behind them, Helen Crowley's smile disappeared. But Caleb Whitmore had not chosen Abigail Mercer because he felt sorry for her. The truth was more dangerous to Red Willow than that. He had noticed her 3 years before. The next morning, Abigail Mercer woke before sunrise and lit the bakery stove as if nothing unusual had happened. That was how she handled most things in Red Willow. Quietly. Flour dusted the sleeves of her work dress. Coffee darkened in a tin pot near the heat. The front windows were still black, and the town had not yet begun making noise about the dance. Abigail preferred it that way. She shaped bread by hand, checked the pies cooling on the back shelf, then opened the old red ledger that lived beneath the counter. The cover was worn smooth at the corners. Inside were names, dates, small debts, and amounts written in careful pencil. Some had been paid. Some had not. A railroad worker who had lost 2 fingers. A mother raising 3 children alone. An elderly stable hand who had spent his last money on medicine. Abigail had crossed out more than one balance without collecting a cent. She never called it charity. She simply decided some people had already paid enough in other ways. For years earlier, after Daniel Mercer died from illness, the bakery had been left to her along with a business note he had taken out to repair the ovens and expand the dining room. There had been no hidden fortune. No secret land. Just a payment schedule and a building that needed work every season. At first, Red Willow had treated Abigail gently. Women brought casseroles. Men offered advice. Then sympathy began to change shape. Sell the bakery, they told her. Move in with family. Find another husband before it gets too late. Some even suggested she might have better luck if she made herself smaller in every possible way. Abigail listened. Then opened the bakery again the next morning. She had been doing that ever since. Still, the final payment on Daniel's loan was coming due in the spring, and the money she had saved was not quite enough. She closed the ledger when the bell above the front door rang. Caleb Whitmore stepped inside carrying his hat. Abigail did not smile. If you came to apologize for last night, do not. Caleb paused near the door. Was not planning to. Good. He took a seat at the counter. Coffee, then. Abigail poured him a cup and set it down. 3 cents. Caleb placed the coins beside the saucer without argument. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was not comfortable, exactly. But it was not unpleasant either. Caleb glanced around the room, then toward the ledger resting near Abigail's hand. Something in his face changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Abigail noticed. You know that book? Caleb looked at the faded red cover for a long second. I know what it means. Abigail frowned. I doubt that. Caleb lifted his coffee but did not drink. 3 winters ago, 3 men came in here half frozen and broke. Abigail searched her memory. There had been many men like that. Caleb watched her carefully. They worked for me. She looked at him again. This time, more closely. Caleb reached toward the ledger, then stopped before touching it. And that was the first time I heard your name. Abigail rested both hands on the counter and studied Caleb as if he had just opened a door she did not remember closing. 3 men, she said. That does not narrow it down much. Caleb almost smiled. It was December. Snow on the North Road. One of them had a red scarf tied around his neck because he had lost his coat. That did it. Abigail's expression changed. The memory returned in pieces. 3 young ranch hands had stumbled into the bakery near closing time, boots soaked through, faces pale from cold, too proud to admit they had not eaten since morning. One had counted coins twice before asking the price of stew. Another had whispered that they should leave. Abigail had heard him. She had filled 3 bowls anyway. You cannot pay, she had told them, opening the red ledger, so you can pay later. The men had eaten like they were afraid the food might disappear. Caleb had arrived in Red Willow the following afternoon looking for them. By then, they were back on the trail. He had stepped into the bakery, given Abigail their names, and asked what they owed. She had opened the ledger, found the entries, and drawn a line through all 3. They will pay me when they are steady again, she had said. They are steady now, Caleb had answered. Abigail had shrugged. Then maybe they can help somebody else. She remembered saying it. What she did not remember was Caleb standing there afterward, hat in his hands, watching her return to the bread dough as if the matter were finished. Back in the present, Abigail folded her arms. So that was you. That was me. And you have been remembering 3 bowls of stew for 3 years? Not the stew. Caleb looked down at the coffee in front of him. The way you treated them. Abigail gave a quiet breath through her nose. They were hungry. Most people would have noticed they were broke first. She did not answer. Caleb continued carefully. One of those men is foreman on my East Range now. Another has a wife and a baby in Cheyenne. The third sends money home to his mother every month. Abigail glanced toward the red ledger. Good. That single word carried more feeling than Caleb expected. He saw it then. She had never fed them to be remembered. That was exactly why he had remembered. Still, Abigail was not ready to trust the meaning behind his visits. You came in here today to tell me I once did something decent? No. Caleb reached for his cup. I came in for coffee. And yesterday? His hand stopped. Outside, a wagon rolled past, wheels grinding over hard dirt. Caleb looked toward the window, then back at her. Yesterday, I heard something I did not like. Abigail's face hardened slightly. So it was pity. No. He answered too quickly for doubt. Then slower, pity would have been asking you to dance because they hurt you. Abigail held his gaze. And what was it? Caleb was quiet long enough that the bakery clock seemed suddenly loud. I wanted to dance with you. Simple. No speech. No rescue. Abigail looked away first. She picked up a towel and wiped a counter that was already clean. Caleb finished his coffee, set the cup down, and stood. 3 cents, she said. He placed the coins beside the saucer. Then, before leaving, he nodded toward the red ledger. I did not remember you because you needed help, Abigail. His hand settled on the door latch. I remembered you because you gave it without making anyone feel small. The bell rang as he stepped outside. Abigail stood alone behind the counter, staring at the 3 coins he had left behind. For the first time, she began to wonder if Caleb Whitmore had not crossed that dance floor on a sudden impulse at all. 3 days later, Abigail heard the first wagon wheel skid outside her bakery before anyone in Red Willow understood how quickly the cold had turned dangerous. By dusk, the road north was buried beneath drifting snow, the stagecoach had stopped 2 miles outside town, and 6 travelers had been brought in with wet coats and shaking hands. Abigail did not wait for the sheriff to organize anything. She pushed tables against the wall, cleared the dining room, and started counting what she had. 8 wool blankets. 12 chairs. 2 benches. Enough flour for 40 loaves if she stretched it. Potatoes for stew. Coffee for perhaps 2 nights. Children near the stove, she said. Wet coats by the back wall. Nobody takes a second. Bowl until everybody has had a first. No one argued. Caleb arrived less than an hour later with 4 ranch hands and a wagon stacked with split wood. Snow clung to his hat and shoulders. He stamped his boots once at the door and looked around the crowded room. What do you need? Abigail pointed without slowing down. More wood behind the stove. Blankets if you have them. And somebody needs to bring Mrs. Bell from the boarding house. Her legs are bad. Caleb nodded. Done. That was all. No orders shouted across the room. No grand gesture. He carried wood beside his own men, hauled water from the pump, then left again to help bring in the stranded stagecoach passengers. Abigail noticed more than she meant to. When one ranch hand slowed from exhaustion, Caleb took the heavier end of the crate without comment. When a frightened boy asked where his father was, Caleb crouched so they were eye level and answered softly, "He is coming. Your father is coming." Then he stayed beside the boy until the door opened and the man rushed in. Hours passed. The bakery smelled of wet wool, wood smoke, coffee, and onions simmering in an iron pot. Abigail kept moving. 1 bowl. 1 blanket. 1 worried face at a time. Near midnight, she reached for another stack of cups and found a bowl of stew sitting where the cups had been. Caleb stood on the other side of the counter. Eat. There are still people awake. They have eaten. I am fine. Caleb glanced at her untouched bowl. That was not the question. Abigail gave him a tired look. You order your cattle around like this? Cattle listen faster. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Small. Surprised. Caleb smiled but did not press the victory. Sit for 5 minutes. 3. 4. Abigail shook her head. You negotiate badly. Only when I am tired. She sat. For several minutes, they ate in silence while the storm pressed against the windows. Around them, people slept beneath coats and quilts. Somewhere near the stove, a child murmured in a dream. Abigail looked at Caleb. You could have sent your men. Could have. But you came. Caleb scraped the last spoonful from his bowl. So did you. She almost reminded him that this was her bakery. Instead, she understood what he meant. Neither of them had stayed because anyone was watching. That made the silence between them feel different. Later, when the lamps had been turned low, they sat near the stove while everyone else slept. Abigail told him about Daniel for the first time. Not the illness. The ordinary things. How he sang off-key while sweeping. How he always burned biscuits. Caleb told her about his father, who had taught him that owning land meant nothing if a man could not be trusted on it. The conversation was quiet. Uneven. Real. When dawn finally turned the windows gray, Abigail realized Caleb Whitmore knew more about her than most people in Red Willow ever bothered to ask. And for the first time, she was beginning to want to know him too. By the end of the week, Caleb Whitmore had become a familiar shape in Abigail's doorway. Not every morning. Not enough to make a spectacle of it. Just often enough for people to notice. Sometimes he ordered coffee and a biscuit. Sometimes he brought an invoice from one of his ranch hands and asked Abigail to settle it properly instead of letting the man leave it unpaid. Once, he stood near the counter for nearly 10 minutes arguing with her about whether molasses belonged in cornbread. Abigail told him it did not. Caleb told her that was because she had never tasted his mother's recipe. Your mother was wrong, Abigail said. Caleb stared at her. That is a dangerous thing to say to a man holding hot coffee. Abigail almost smiled. Almost. Those small exchanges began to matter more than she wanted them to. He never asked her to be grateful for his attention. Never looked around the room to see who was watching. When the bakery was busy, he waited like everyone else. When she disagreed with him, he did not seem offended. Red Willow noticed that too. At first, the gossip came dressed as curiosity. Then curiosity sharpened. Abigail heard her name in the general store one afternoon while buying sugar. Helen Crowley stood near the fabric counter with 2 other women. She did not lower her voice much. Caleb has always had a generous heart, Helen said. One woman asked what she meant. Helen smiled as she examined a bolt of green cloth. Some men rescue stray horses. Some rescue lonely women. The others gave small, uncomfortable laughs. Abigail stood 3 aisles away, holding a sack of sugar against her hip. Helen never looked directly at her. That was the worst part. The insult had been polished until it sounded almost kind. Abigail paid for the sugar and walked back to the bakery without speaking to anyone. By evening, anger had cooled into something heavier. She had spent 4 years refusing to become a charity case. Now one wealthy man drank coffee at her counter, and half the town had already decided why. Caleb arrived just before closing. He removed his hat and stopped when he saw her face. Bad day? For you or me? He studied her. I suppose that depends. Abigail wiped the counter harder than necessary. People think you are being kind to me. Caleb nodded once. I am being kind to you. Her eyes lifted sharply. Caleb continued before she could speak. I try to be kind to most people. That does not answer me. No. It does not. He set his hat on the counter. What are you asking? Abigail held his gaze. If this is pity, Caleb, take it somewhere else. The room went still. He could have defended himself. Could have reminded her of the dance, the storm, the mornings at her counter. He did none of it. All right, he said. Abigail blinked. Caleb picked up his hat. I will not come where I am not wanted. Then he left. The bell above the door gave one soft ring behind him. Abigail stood there expecting relief. Instead, the bakery felt strangely empty. 1 day passed. Then 2. Then 3. Caleb did not return. On the 4th morning, Abigail poured 2 cups of coffee before she realized what she had done. She stared at the 2nd cup until the steam faded. And that was when she understood something she had not been ready to admit. She was not waiting for Caleb Whitmore's money, his sympathy, or even his attention. She was waiting for him. Caleb returned on the 6th morning, but not for coffee. Abigail heard the door open while she was stacking fresh bread near the counter. She looked up too quickly, then wished she had not. Caleb noticed. He said nothing about it. His hat stayed in his hands. His face was quieter than usual. I need to ask you about a man named Thomas Reed. Abigail knew the name before she knew why Caleb had come. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out the red ledger. He worked for you. 11 years. Caleb paused. He died 2 days ago after a riding accident outside Cheyenne. His wife and 2 children are there. I am settling what he left behind. Abigail stopped turning pages. I am sorry. Caleb nodded once. He was one of the 3 men you fed that winter. She remembered then. Thomas had worn the red scarf. He had apologized twice before touching the stew. Abigail found the old entry. $4.12. A single line crossed through it years ago. Caleb leaned closer. Did he ever pay that? No. Then why is it marked settled? Abigail rested one finger on the faded pencil line. Because it was. Caleb looked at her. By who? Nobody. Abigail. She closed the ledger halfway. He was hungry. He was cold. He had no money. That was the whole problem. Caleb waited. She gave a small sigh. A hungry man already owes the world enough. The words settled between them. Caleb looked down at the book for a long moment, then reached into his coat. Abigail immediately raised a hand. Do not. His hand stopped. I was going to pay it. I know. It was his debt. No. It was my decision. Caleb studied her face, then slowly removed his hand from his coat. All right. Abigail almost smiled. You are getting better at that. At what? Listening when I say no. Something warm passed through his expression. I have had practice. The tension that had lived between them for nearly a week softened. Then Abigail asked the question that had been bothering her. Why are you doing all this yourself? Caleb frowned. Doing what? Settling his accounts. Writing to his family. You have a foreman. Clerks. Men who could handle it. Caleb looked toward the front window. A wagon passed outside, slow over the packed dirt. Thomas rode for me 11 years. He turned back. A man is worth more than the work you get out of him. Abigail said nothing. She had heard rich men speak about loyalty before. Usually they meant obedience. Caleb meant something else. For the first time, she saw the same rule in him that had guided her own hands for years. Feed people before counting what they owe. Remember the person before the account. Caleb glanced at the ledger again. You know, I thought I understood why I remembered you. Abigail raised an eyebrow. And now? He looked directly at her. Now I think I only understood the beginning. Her breath caught, barely. Caleb did not move closer. He did not need to. Abigail closed the ledger and placed it beneath the counter. Then she poured 2 cups of coffee. She set one in front of Caleb. He reached for a coin. Abigail covered the saucer with her hand. This one is on me. Caleb looked at her hand, then at her face. That sounds dangerous. Do not make too much of it. Would not dream of it. They drank in silence. But it was no longer the silence of 2 people measuring distance. Something had shifted. Abigail had spent years fearing that Caleb might see her as someone who needed saving. Now she was beginning to see something far more unsettling. He might be the first man in Red Willow who understood why she had never wanted to be saved at all. By late February, the snow had begun shrinking into gray patches along the road, and Abigail's final loan payment was only 3 weeks away. She had counted the money twice that morning. Then a third time. Still short. Not ruined. Not desperate. Just short enough to make sleep difficult. She closed the cash box when the bank clerk stepped into the bakery carrying a folded notice. Caleb happened to be at the far end of the counter, finishing coffee before riding north. Abigail saw his eyes move from the clerk to the paper in her hand. She hated that he noticed. Routine business, she said. The clerk nodded politely. Final installment due March 15th, Mrs. Mercer. Then he left. Caleb waited until the door closed. How much? Abigail kept her back to him. None of your concern. That means enough to matter. She turned. Caleb. He lifted one hand. I am not trying to pry. You are doing a fine imitation. He looked at the notice. I can pay it. The room seemed to tighten around those 4 words. Abigail stared at him. Caleb continued carefully. Not as a favor you owe me for. No interest. No conditions. You can repay me whenever you want. No. Abigail, listen. I did. Her voice stayed calm. That made it sharper. The answer is no. Caleb stepped closer to the counter but stopped there. You could lose the bakery over pride. And I could lose something worse by letting you buy my problem. His expression changed. That is not what I am doing. I know you do not mean it that way. She folded the notice and set it beside the red ledger. But Red Willow will. Caleb exhaled. I do not care what Red Willow says. Abigail looked directly at him. I do. He frowned. Since when? Not because I need their approval. She pressed one hand against the counter. Because I have spent 4 years hearing that I cannot manage this place alone. That I should sell. That I should find a husband. That I should be grateful if some man decides I am worth the trouble. Caleb said nothing. Abigail's voice softened. If I ever marry again, I need to know the man chose me. Not a debt he bought along with me. That landed harder than anger would have. Caleb looked down for a moment. Then nodded. All right. Abigail blinked. No argument. No wounded pride. Just respect. After a pause, Caleb asked, then what can I do? Nothing I have not earned. He considered that. My ranch needs bread. Abigail narrowed her eyes. Your ranch already buys bread. From a supplier 20 miles east who misses deliveries every other week. And you are telling me this now? Because I was trying not to insult you. She almost laughed. How thoughtful. Caleb leaned on the counter. Give me a price. A real one. Same price you would charge anybody else. Abigail studied him, suspicious. Then she reached for paper. By the end of the hour, they had a written order for bread, biscuits, and dried pies twice a week. No gift. No special rate. Business. Two neighboring ranches heard that Whitmore's crews were buying from Mercer Bakery and placed smaller orders of their own. For the next 17 days, Abigail worked. Before sunrise and long after dark. Caleb never offered money again. 3 days before the deadline, she walked into the bank carrying an envelope. Every dollar was hers. Every cent earned. The clerk counted it, stamped the note, and handed her the final receipt. Abigail stood outside the bank afterward with the paper trembling slightly in her hand. Caleb was waiting across the street beside his horse. He did not ask if she needed anything. He simply crossed over and said, "Coffee?" Abigail looked at him. Then smiled. "You buying?" Caleb smiled back. "At full price." And as they walked toward the bakery together, Abigail realized something had changed between them. Caleb had stopped trying to help her stand. He had learned how to stand beside her. Spring came slowly to Red Willow, and by April the schoolhouse floor had been swept clean for another community dance. The same fiddler tuned his instrument near the wall. The same long tables held coffee, biscuits, and pie. Even the same row of wooden chairs stood beneath the windows. Abigail noticed that first. Months earlier, she had sat in the last chair while people decided what kind of future a woman like her should expect. Tonight, she walked in alone. Not thinner. Not transformed. Not dressed to prove anything. She wore a deep green dress she had made for herself and carried no apology in her posture. The bakery loan was paid. Her new ranch orders were steady. For the first time in years, her future belonged entirely to her own choices. People noticed that too. Caleb arrived 20 minutes later. He had spent the day checking cattle along the north pasture and still had dust on his boots. Several women greeted him. Helen Crowley greeted him loudest. Rose stood beside her in pale blue, graceful, and carefully composed. Abigail was speaking with Mrs. Bell near the refreshment table when the music began. She did not turn toward Caleb immediately. She did not need to. Over the past month, they had stopped measuring every conversation for hidden meaning. He visited the bakery. She had ridden out to his ranch twice. They argued about coffee, laughed about his terrible cornbread, and sometimes sat in silence without needing to fill it. Nothing had been declared. That made every small thing feel more serious. Then Abigail heard Helen's voice. "Well," she said softly to another woman, "I suppose every man eventually settles for someone." Abigail's hand stopped beside the coffee pot. The words were quiet. Almost polite. Just like before. Caleb heard them too. The room did not become silent all at once. It happened slowly. One conversation stopped. Then another. Helen realized too late that Caleb was looking at her. Abigail expected anger. Maybe a sharp reply. Instead, Caleb turned away from Helen completely. He crossed the room toward Abigail. No hurry. No performance. When he stopped in front of her, the old schoolhouse seemed to hold its breath. Caleb looked at her, not at the crowd. There was never a list. Helen frowned. "I beg your pardon?" Caleb did not look back. So she was never last. Abigail felt something tighten behind her ribs. Not because he had defended her. Because he had refused to make Helen the center of the moment. He offered his hand exactly as he had months before. "Mrs. Mercer. May I have this dance?" Abigail looked down at his hand. Then up at him. This time, there was no suspicion. No fear of pity. Only one question left, and it belonged to her. She let him wait one extra second. "You may." Caleb smiled. They stepped onto the floor as the fiddler began a slower tune. Nobody applauded. Abigail was grateful for that. She did not want a victory over the room. She wanted the man holding her hand. Caleb danced carefully, almost too carefully, and Abigail whispered, "You are counting. I am trying not to step on you. You are failing quietly." That made him laugh. By the end of the song, the room had begun talking again. Helen said nothing. Rose watched them with an expression Abigail could not quite read, then turned away. Caleb walked Abigail back toward the edge of the floor. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said, "I want to ask you something." Abigail's heart shifted. Caleb glanced around at the crowded room and shook his head. "Not here." "Then where?" He looked at her with a seriousness that changed the air between them. "Somewhere nobody else gets a vote." And Abigail knew, before he said another word, that the next choice would belong only to the two of them. 3 evenings after the dance, Caleb came to the bakery just before Abigail turned the sign on the door. The last customer had gone. The lamps were low. Flour still dusted the long wooden table, and the red ledger rested near the cash box where it had sat through 4 difficult years. Caleb removed his hat and stood there for a moment without speaking. Abigail looked at him. "You said you wanted to ask me something where nobody else gets a vote." "I did." He stepped closer to the counter, then stopped. No flowers. No audience. No carefully prepared speech. Just Caleb, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. He reached into his coat and placed a small ring on the wood between them. Abigail did not touch it. She looked at him instead. Caleb drew a slow breath. "I have spent most of my life meeting people who knew what I owned before they knew me." Abigail folded her arms. "That sounds inconvenient for a wealthy man." "It is less pleasant than people imagine." A small smile touched her mouth. Caleb continued. "You never cared how many cattle I had. You argued with me about cornbread before you knew the size of my ranch. Your mother was still wrong about the molasses. I knew you would say that." They both smiled, and then the room became quiet again. Caleb looked toward the red ledger. "I noticed you because of what you did for 3 hungry men. I respected you because you never used kindness to make anybody smaller. Then I watched you run this place, help this town, pay your own debt, and tell me no when no was the answer." He met her eyes. "Somewhere along the way, Abigail, respect became the one thing I could not ride away from." Her expression softened. Caleb took her hand. "I do not need a woman Red Willow approves of. I want the woman I trust beside me when money is easy, when winters are hard, and when neither of us knows what comes next." Then he lowered himself onto one knee. "Abigail Mercer, will you marry me?" She let the silence stretch until his eyebrows lifted slightly. "You are enjoying this," he said. "A little." Then her voice softened. "Yes, Caleb. I will." They married that fall in the same schoolhouse where Abigail had once sat alone against the wall. The same fiddler played. The same wooden chairs lined the room. Before walking toward Caleb, Abigail passed the chair where she had spent that first harvest social. She stopped for half a second and touched its worn back. Then she kept walking. She did not look at Helen Crowley. She did not need to. After the wedding, Mercer Bakery and Eating House kept its name above the door. Caleb never suggested changing it. Abigail continued working there because it was hers, not because she had anything left to prove. Caleb continued riding with his men because wealth had never taught him how to stop working. Every winter, one table near the stove remained open for anyone who needed a hot meal and could not pay. The red ledger stayed beneath the counter. Some debts were collected. Some were quietly crossed away. Years later, newcomers sometimes heard that Caleb Whitmore had surprised Red Willow by marrying the widow other people had overlooked. The people who understood the story knew that was never quite right. Abigail had not been waiting for a rich man to give her value. She had value before Caleb ever crossed that room. He was simply wise enough to recognize it, and humble enough to love her without trying to own the life she had built. Maybe that is what this story leaves behind. We often judge people by appearance, money, age, status, or the place they occupy in a room. But character usually reveals itself in quieter moments, in how someone treats a hungry stranger, respects a boundary, keeps a promise, or stands beside another person without taking away their dignity. I believe love means more when it does not rescue us from ourselves, but respects who we already are. What mattered most to you in Abigail and Caleb's story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if stories about dignity, kindness, and quiet courage belong in your kind of West, subscribe and ride with us for the next one.